Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are here to do my wrap up for the month of January, plus a book that I finished at the very beginning of February, but I'm gonna include it here because it came out in a vlog that I've already had up on my channel. So we're gonna go over the books in the order that I read them per usual, but we're gonna save the two books that came out in my most recent vlog for the end since I've already talked about them on my channel before. So for the rest of the books, we have a book that I was buddy reading with a friend. You can see the glossy glare that's shining on me. And that is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is published by Echo. And I was so nervous to read this book. So I'm really happy that I did it as a buddy read. I read Circe, a number of years ago now. Maybe 5 years ago, which seems crazy. I loved that book. I think it's one of the best audiobooks that I've ever listened to. Circe, plot-wise, was more up my street than Song of Achilles is. Song of Achilles is a retelling of the myth of Achilles and Patroclus. Really, it's mainly about Patroclus. And as most people know, this is a retelling that envisions them as a couple. And I did overall enjoy this. I didn't like it as much as Circe, I will say that up front, but I did really enjoy this. And I was reminded just how talented Madeline Miller is at crafting a full novel. There are so many kind of threads weaving throughout this, and she does a really good job of making it feel seamless. There's also a decent amount of characters in this. She's talented at making them all feel pretty unique and distinct and recognizable when they show up on the page again. And this is just easy to read, and I mean that as a compliment. It's really easy to read. It is the type of story where it hits the exact emotional beats that you think it's going to hit, so I don't think it's surprising in that way. Plus, it's also a retelling, so if you know the myth, you know kind of what's going to happen. I think she's successful in making you feel the things that you should feel. I just tend to like it a little bit better when it doesn't feel as prescribed as it does in this, but I can definitely see why someone would really love this book. I really enjoyed their mentor character that they have at a chunk of this book. He's the centaur. I don't remember his name. Chiron, is that how you pronounce his name? I'm not sure, but I really loved him and this kind of father figure stand-in that he is for these two boys who don't have the best fathers themselves. This book it really heavily relies on the relationships that are formed throughout the novel and getting you to be emotionally invested in them, and I do think it succeeds in that. And yeah, I just thought this was a lovely story. Madeline Miller is definitely a talented author. So that was the first thing that I read. Then I went over to Electric. This is a collection done by Two Lines Press in their Calico series. This one is actually a little bit unique because this anthology series is half short stories, half poetry. And normally the collections are divided into either a poetry anthology or a short story anthology, but this one has both. They're all Caribbean female authors that are collected in this one. So that's sort of the demographic that they're centering this anthology around. And I enjoyed this one a lot. I liked some of the short story authors better than some of the poetry. With anthologies, I always think it's a success if I like a little bit more than half, and I would reread more than half again, and that is the case here. There is a story that has still stayed with me that is about a brother and a sister in here that I just can't get out of my mind. The story itself is haunting, and it has haunted me in a way. I can't stop thinking about it, and I just really adore this series. Two Lines Press lets the translators select pieces or authors that they think deserve to be better known in English-speaking countries, and they put them together in a collection, and I absolutely love that idea, and this was another great addition to it. So if you're interested in some female Caribbean authors, this is a great way to sample 8 of them and see who you want to read from more. So I will be picking up a couple authors again from this collection, hopefully later this year. So that is Electric. Then we're going over to some poetry, and I read Field Music by Alexandria Hall. This is done by Echo, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. But this collection was one of the ones that was selected for the National Poetry Series winners. So there are 5 publishers, and each of them selects a winner to publish a poetry collection from. And the thing that's really cool about this prize is that it's a combination of big 5 publishers and independent publishers. So obviously this is the one that HarperCollins published. And this collection, I will say, was sort of so for me. I kept getting pulled out of some of the poems, and I really can't put my finger totally on why. This poetry collection is talking about the ways in which we describe ourselves and describe humanity, and how language sort of fails us in a number of ways to fully be able to realize what it means to be human, to have a concept of the self. And in some ways it can be pretty cerebral in that sense. But this also has a decent amount of allusions to it, to violence, or maybe the underlying threat of violence that the author is experiencing in day-to-day life. So I would say there's trigger warnings for this. There's not anything that is explicitly on the page, if I'm remembering correctly, but it's a lot of like allusions to things happening off of the page. If you like a grittier collection that is focused on some of the like contradictions of being a complicated human in the world, I think this could be a really good fit for you. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, I definitely would recommend you pick up Field Music. And then we get to my favorite book of the month, and that is Madwoman. This is by Chelsea Bieker, and it's published by Little Brown, which is an imprint of Hachette. And I loved this book. I was really excited to pick this up after I got to hear Chelsea Bieker speak about it at the Portland Book Festival. I've seen her speak a number of times before, and she's just phenomenal. This novel is somewhat autobiographical for her, which she talks about very openly. It's about intimate partner violence, but we're specifically following it through our main character, Clove, who finds herself in this really idyllic life. She has a loving husband, she has 2 kids. She's also very dissatisfied with her life at the same time. This book is partially told in letters, and it's letters coming from a women's prison. You don't at first know who or why that the person is writing to Clove, but that mystery starts to unravel as the book goes on, and you begin to realize that there are many mysteries that surround Clove, and particularly her childhood. So we're getting this back and forth in the letters that correspond to flashbacks about Clove's childhood, as we start to have an understanding of just how much of her identity she's hidden from her husband in particular, but sort of everyone else that's currently in her life. And we also start to gather that part of her growing dissatisfaction is that she's really struggling to make honest, true connection with people. She is seeking that in some parasocial relationships. She's very committed to her online following from her Instagram page. She sort of gets wrapped up in this like mommy wellness community. And this book is grappling with the idea of how well can you truly connect with someone who doesn't actually know the full truth about you, and the ways that lies keep us from the intimacy that we desire. But also that everybody lies to some degree. Even these small little lies that we compromise with in our daily lives that slowly kind of eat away at us, and particularly for women. So all of this masking that women have to do about their thoughts and their feelings, not just to keep themselves safe, which that is sometimes the case, but also to have to keep everyone around them happy, which is just exhausting. And I thought this book portrayed that so well. This book had so many moments where I was just like, ugh, same. I have totally felt that way before. And I do think this book is really relatable in some of the like darker things that show up for people. And Chelsea Bieker, I think, is just such a master at representing some of those like darker feelings and thoughts that we have. This book has some really great dialogue in it, and this book is also very plotty. There are some twists and turns in this. It's not a thriller per se, like not a standard thriller, but there are twists and turns and reveals that happen throughout the book. I just thought this was all around a stunner of a novel, and I hope a lot more people read this and discover how wonderful Chelsea Bieker is. So the last thing I'll quickly say about this is it does have a good amount of trigger warnings, so please look into those before you read this book. Chelsea Bieker, again, has been honest that like she herself has personal history with intimate partner violence. So I think she has crafted this very carefully and intentionally, but there is a good amount of violence that is depicted in this novel. So know that before you go in, but this is Madwoman. I think it's a great, great piece of fiction. And then lastly, for the books that I have not already covered on my channel, we have this chunker, which I'm sure many people read in January, and that is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This edition is, it's like something Tower, Red Tower, yeah, Red Tower Books, which is an imprint of Entangled Publishing, which I'm not really familiar with, but I have different editions of all of this series. This one is very beautiful. It has sprayed edges, and this is the third book in the, what is it? The Empyrean series, I think is what it's called. And I really enjoyed this one. I do think it's my least favorite of the three so far, but just barely. And I think that's really a consequence of this being a middle book in some ways. This book has the most disparate plot of the three so far. And I think that cuts down on the pacing and the intrigue just a little bit compared to the last two books. We are traveling to a lot of different locations, so you don't get to go as deep in certain places. We're going wide because we need to find a way to connect the plot from the previous book to get to where we need to go in the fourth book. But this is still very intriguing, very fun, very plotty and exciting. And this book, I will say, has the least amount of steam of the three books. So if you didn't like how much steam was in the first two, this one has less of that. But I won't really say anything else about the plot in case you haven't read it yet. But I did really enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to the fourth one. I thought the fourth book was going to be the last one, but apparently it's going to be a 5-book series. So I'm nervous because from the third to the fourth book is going to be the longest I'll have waited in between books, because I read the first two at the end of last year. And I had to read recaps in order to get to this book. I couldn't really remember all of the characters. I couldn't remember some of the plot. And I started to realize like, oh, I don't read a lot of fantasy series where you need to remember all of these threads. And we'll see how that goes going into the fourth book. But yeah, enjoyed this one and thought it was a really fun time. So that was Onyx Storm. And then the two books that came out in the vlog most recently on my channel were Memento Mori by Muriel Spark. This edition is published by the Times Magazine. It's a very old edition. And this is kind of like a cozy crime book. It centers around a big cast of 70 or 80-year-olds. They are getting these calls from an unknown person saying that they have to remember that they're gonna die. And it's got some interesting commentary on the ways that we don't take elderly people seriously. We minimize their feelings and their intellectual ability. And I thought this book did a good job of that. The ending did let me down. I thought it was a little bit of like, okay, facts, it's over, to just wrap everything up. And I wanted it to be stretched out some, so I wish it was longer to kind of really let the tension build to a climactic moment. But otherwise, I enjoyed this. I think it's cozy, and I'm glad that I have my first Muriel Spark under my belt, and hopefully it will not be the last. And then the other book for that vlog was The Undocumented Americans by Karla Cornejo Villavicencio. And this one is published by One World, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And this is a work of creative nonfiction in the form of 6 essays that the author is reporting on undocumented Americans that she interviews. Most of the essays are centered around a specific theme. So what it was like for undocumented Americans in the aftermath of 9/11, what it was like for undocumented Americans who were living in Flint, Michigan, and affected by the tainted water that the government was trying to cover up. So I think this is super informative. I thought this gave a lot of different representation to the specific ways that undocumented Americans receive just a huge disproportionate amount of prejudice and barriers to succeeding, and still how much they're able to accomplish despite those amount of barriers that most other people in the country just are never going to have to face. So I thought that was really good. There were some stylistic choices about this that I did not like. I talk more in detail about that in the vlog, so if you want to know more, you can go there. But overall, I think this is well worth the information that you get from it, even though I didn't love some of the creative part of the creative nonfiction choices. So those are the 6 books that I read in the month of January. If you have read any of these, please let me know what you thought of them. And let me know what your favorite book was that you read in January, and maybe I will check it out. So with that, I will see you all in the next video. Bye.